In the summer of 1971, a ranked kendo instructor walked into Bruce Lee's private studio in Los Angeles carrying a bamboo shinai. She had trained under Japanese masters for 12 years. She requested a demonstration, her weapon against his empty hands. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be recounted by witnesses for decades, not because of what Bruce Lee did, but because of what he refused to do. It was a Thursday afternoon in June. The Chinatown studio was not large. Mirrors on one wall, wooden floor worn smooth from years of footwork drills. A few students were stretching near the back, waiting for the evening class to begin. Bruce Lee was at the center of the room, working through Chi Sao with Dan Inosanto, hands moving in tight circles, no tension, just sensitivity and structure. Then the door opened. A woman in her early 30s stepped inside. She wore a dark hakama, the traditional divided skirt of Japanese martial arts, and carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Her posture was upright, deliberate. She did not look around the room like a tourist. She looked directly at Bruce Lee. One of the students moved to greet her, but she raised a hand politely and waited. Bruce Lee stopped mid-drill. He turned, wiped his hands on a towel, and walked toward her without hurry. She introduced herself. Her name is not widely recorded. Most witnesses refer to her only as the kendo instructor or the Japanese stylist. She had been training in kendo and iaido since she was 16. She held a ranking under a recognized lineage in Los Angeles and had traveled to Japan twice to train at a traditional dojo in Kyoto. She was not there to insult him. She had read about Jeet Kune Do in Black Belt magazine. She had heard Bruce Lee speak in interviews about adaptability, about formlessness, about weapons being extensions of the body, not replacements for skill. She wanted to see it, not in theory, in application. She asked, in clear and formal English, if he would be willing to demonstrate his method against a traditional weapon. Bruce Lee did not smile. He did not deflect. He asked her what weapon she had in mind. She unzipped the bag and drew out a bamboo shinai, a practice sword used in kendo. Lightweight, flexible but capable of real impact. She held it with both hands in a middle guard position, clean form, no theatrics. The students had stopped stretching. Dan Inosanto stepped back against the wall. Bruce Lee looked at the shinai, then at her. Then he nodded once. Okay. He did not ask why. He did not explain his philosophy in advance. He did not set conditions or make disclaimers. He simply agreed. She bowed. He returned the bow, and the room became very still. Bruce Lee gestured toward the center of the room. She walked forward and set her bag near the wall. He moved a wooden chair out of the space. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of traffic outside and the shuffle of students repositioning themselves along the edges of the room. Dan Inosanto later recalled that Bruce Lee's expression did not change. There was no sign of anticipation, no visible calculation. He looked the way he always looked before a drill, focused but not tense. The woman stood in the center, shinai held at her side. She was calm. Her breathing was even. She had done this before, sparred, demonstrated, tested her skills in controlled environments. This was not recklessness. This was inquiry. Bruce Lee stopped a few feet away from her and asked one question. Full contact or demonstration? She considered for a moment. Demonstration, she said. Controlled strikes. Real intention. He nodded. No pads. No pads. You will strike where you intend to strike. Yes. And I will respond as I respond. Yes. There was no contract, no waiver, no referee. Just two practitioners agreeing on terms in front of witnesses. Bruce Lee stepped back and rolled his shoulders once. He shook out his hands. Then he stood still, feet shoulder-width apart, hands low and open at his sides. His weight was centered. His eyes were on her, but not fixed. Soft focus, aware of the whole. She raised the shinai into a high guard position, both hands on the grip, blade angled above her head. Classical kendo stance. Her rear foot pivoted slightly, her knees bent. She did not announce her readiness. She simply moved. The shinai came down in a single vertical cut, aimed at the crown of his head. Men strike, the most fundamental attack in kendo. Fast, direct, committed. Bruce Lee was not there. He had shifted his weight and angled his body just outside the line of the strike. The bamboo blade passed inches from his shoulder and cut through empty air. No block, no deflection, just absence. She recovered immediately and reset to guard position. No frustration, no hesitation. She had missed, but she had not lost composure. Bruce Lee returned to his neutral stance, hands still low, expression unchanged. One of the students exhaled. She attacked again, this time a diagonal cut from her right, targeting his collarbone. The same speed, the same commitment. Again he moved before the strike arrived. A small step, a subtle turn of the torso. The shinai whistled past his chest. He did not counter. He did not grab. He simply let the weapon pass. She stepped back and lowered the blade slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in focus. She was reading him now, adjusting. Bruce Lee remained still. She took a breath. Then she came forward again, this time with a thrust aimed at his sternum. A tsukai strike, less common in kendo, more direct and dangerous. Bruce Lee slipped to the outside and, for the first time, raised one hand. His palm touched the back of her leading hand. Not a slap, not a grab, just contact, a light pressure that redirected the thrust an inch to the left. The shinai stopped short of his body. He withdrew his hand and stepped back. She stood in place, shinai still extended, and stared at him. No one in the room moved. She slowly pulled the weapon back to guard position. Her stance had not changed, but something in her eyes had. She had felt it. She did not speak. She adjusted her grip on the shinai and shifted her weight forward. Her rear heel lifted slightly. Her breathing remained controlled, but her focus had sharpened. Bruce Lee returned to his neutral stance, hands open, center low. His gaze had not left her, but it was not aggressive. It was the kind of attention that absorbs everything without reacting to any one thing. Dan Inosanto would later say that Bruce Lee's footwork in that moment was unlike anything he demonstrated in drills. It was not the quick, angular steps he used in sparring. It was softer, more fluid, as if he were constantly adjusting to a rhythm only he could hear. She moved again. This time she did not commit to a single strike. She feinted high with the tip of the shinai, then redirected low toward his lead knee, a coat strike modified for range. It was a more experienced tactic, a test of his reaction time. Bruce Lee's lead leg simply was not there when the bamboo arrived. He had drawn it back and pivoted on his rear foot, rotating his hips just enough to take his entire lower body out of range. The shinai cut through the space where his knee had been a fraction of a second earlier. She recovered and pressed forward immediately, attempting to close distance before he could reset. She delivered another men's strike, vertical, fast, committed, but this time from a closer range, trying to reduce his time to evade. He slipped it, not with a large movement. He tilted his head and shifted his spine, and the blade passed beside his ear. close enough that the students near the wall could hear the rush of air, but it did not touch him. She planted her front foot and pivoted, bringing the Shinai around in a horizontal arc aimed at his ribs. A do strike, meant to simulate a cut across the torso. It was fast and clean, her shoulders and hips rotating together. Bruce Lee stepped inside the arc. The Shinai passed behind him, its energy already spent before it reached the point of impact. He was so close now that the weapon had no space to function. His chest was inches from hers. His hands were still at his sides. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he stepped back, creating distance again. She reset. Her breathing was still controlled, but there was a faint tension now in her shoulders. Not panic, not frustration, just the beginning of realization. She had struck 4 times, 4 different angles, 4 different intentions. None had landed, and he had not once attempted to strike her. One of the students later described it as watching someone try to catch smoke. The shape was there. The intention was real, but the contact never came. She paused, lowering the Shinai slightly, and looked at Bruce Lee with a different expression now. Not challenge, but study. He stood in place and waited. She raised the weapon again. This time she took a full breath, squared her posture, and assumed a more formal stance. She was no longer testing, she was committing. She advanced with a Tsuki thrust, direct, linear, both hands driving the tip of the Shinai toward his throat. The kind of strike that allows no margin for error in evasion. Bruce Lee moved his head 2 inches to the left. The tip of the Shinai passed beside his jaw. His eyes never left hers, and then, as she extended fully, he did something different. He stepped forward into her space, wrapped his fingers lightly around the shaft of the Shinai just below her grip, and guided it gently downward and to the side. It was not a disarm, it was not a clash, it was simply control. The bamboo blade touched the floor. Her arms were still holding it, but the weapon was no longer in a position to function. Bruce Lee released the Shinai and stepped back. She straightened slowly, pulling the weapon up to guard position. Her chest rose and fell once. Her expression had shifted again. She took 2 steps back and lowered the Shinai to her side. Her posture had not collapsed, her breathing had not broken, but there was a stillness in her now that had not been there before. Bruce Lee remained in place. He did not speak. He did not offer commentary or correction. He simply stood, hands open, waiting. One of the students near the wall shifted his weight, and the floorboard beneath him creaked. The sound was sharp in the silence. She looked down at the Shinai in her hands. Then she looked back at Bruce Lee. She raised the weapon again, but this time her approach was different. She did not assume a formal stance. She lowered her center slightly and held the Shinai at a middle guard, more mobile, less committed. Her weight shifted subtly between her feet. She was no longer relying on classical form. She was improvising. She moved forward with a short, testing step. The Shinai flicked toward his lead hand. Not a full strike, just a probe, a distraction. Bruce Lee did not react to it. His hand stayed where it was. She immediately followed with a diagonal cut toward his shoulder, pivoting her hips to generate power. He had already sidestepped. The blade passed through the space where his body had been, but this time she did not reset to her original position. She kept moving, circling him, changing the angle, testing his response from a different line. Bruce Lee turned with her. His feet adjusted in small increments. His hands remained low, open, unreactive. She fainted high again. then dropped into a low, sweeping cut aimed at his lead shin. A less traditional strike, borrowed more from practical combat than from Kendo's formal curriculum. Bruce Lee lifted his foot and let the shinai pass beneath it. His weight shifted smoothly to his rear leg, then returned as he set his foot down again. No wasted height, no instability. She pressed forward immediately, trying to capitalize on the moment his weight was resettling. She thrust the tip of the shinai toward his solar plexus. Fast, linear, no wind-up. Bruce Lee's torso rotated. The tip of the weapon grazed the fabric of his shirt and continued past his body. His hand came up, not to block, but to touch the side of the shinai shaft, guiding its trajectory further offline with the lightest pressure. She pulled back and reset, her breathing slightly heavier now, not from exhaustion, from the effort of constant recalculation. She tried again. This time she altered her rhythm entirely. She moved in with broken timing, half steps, sudden pauses, irregular tempo. It was a tactic meant to disrupt anticipation, to force a premature reaction. Bruce Lee's response did not change. He did not try to predict her. He simply observed and moved when movement was necessary. She struck 3 times in rapid succession, men, coat, do, all from shifting angles, all with full intention. None landed. And then, on the 3rd strike, as the shinai arced toward his ribs, Bruce Lee stepped inside again. This time, his movement was faster. His lead hand came up and made contact with her forward wrist. Not a grab, not a strike. Just a touch, finger and thumb resting lightly against the inside of her wrist. Her arm stopped, not because he had restrained it, but because the contact had interrupted the structure of her movement. The weapon was still in her hands, but the line of force had been broken. Bruce Lee held the contact for less than a second. Then he released and stepped back. She stood still, the shinai hanging at an awkward angle in her grip. Her eyes were locked on his. She adjusted her hands on the weapon, squared her shoulders, and took a breath. She came forward again. A high men's strike, fully committed, her entire body driving the blow downward with traditional kendo form. Bruce Lee moved to the outside and touched her wrist again, this time on the back of her hand. The shinai stopped mid-swing. He stepped away. She lowered the weapon slowly. Her arms remained extended for a moment, as if testing whether the strike could still be completed. It could not. She pulled the shinai back to her chest and stood still. The room was silent. Dan Inosanto later said that in all the years he trained with Bruce Lee, he had never seen him demonstrate control like that. Not dominance, not suppression, just an understanding of structure so complete that force became irrelevant. The woman exhaled. She looked at the shinai in her hands, then at Bruce Lee. And then, for the first time since she had entered the studio, she spoke. "Again?" Bruce Lee nodded. She raised the shinai one more time. Her grip had not loosened, her posture had not faltered, but something in the way she held the weapon had changed. There was no longer the crisp certainty of formal technique. There was only intention. Bruce Lee returned to his stance. His hands hung at his sides. His breathing was even. He had not broken a sweat. She moved forward, this time without a preparatory shift or telegraph. She simply closed the distance and struck. A diagonal cut from her right, clean and fast, targeting the left side of his neck. Bruce Lee slipped it. She followed immediately with a rising thrust, redirecting the momentum upward toward his chin. He tilted his head back. The tip of the shinai passed an inch beneath his jaw. She pivoted and swung horizontally across his midsection, a committed do strike with her full body weight behind it. Bruce Lee stepped into the swing. His left hand touched the back of her leading hand. His right hand touched her forearm, just above the wrist. Both touches were light, fingers barely pressing. The shinai stopped, not because he had blocked it, not because he had trapped it, but because he had interrupted the chain of movement at the exact points where force was being transferred from her body into the weapon. Her arms were still extended. The weapon was still in her hands, but the strike had ended before it could complete. She stood frozen for a moment, feeling the stillness in her own structure. Bruce Lee released her arms and stepped back. She did not immediately reset. She remained in place, the shinai angled downward, her eyes focused somewhere in the middle distance. Then she lifted the weapon again. This time she did not strike. She moved into a high guard position, both hands on the grip, blade raised above her head, and held it there. It was a formal, ready stance, a moment of decision. Bruce Lee did not move. She took a step forward, and for a brief second it seemed she would commit to another attack. But then she stopped. Mid-step, the shinai remained raised, her body remained coiled, but she did not strike. She stood there, suspended in potential, and looked at Bruce Lee. He looked back, and then, slowly, she lowered the weapon. She brought it down to her side and let her arms relax. Her shoulders dropped, her breath released. She bowed. Bruce Lee returned the bow immediately, lowering his head with the same formality she had offered. When they both straightened, she looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was not one of defeat. It was not frustration or embarrassment. It was understanding. She turned and walked to the side of the room where her canvas bag sat against the wall. She slid the shinai back into the bag, zipped it closed, and slung it over her shoulder. No one spoke. She walked toward the door, then paused. She turned back and bowed once more, not to Bruce Lee specifically, but to the room. Dan Inosanto bowed in return. The students followed. Bruce Lee nodded. She opened the door and left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. For several seconds, no one moved. Then one of the students exhaled audibly and looked at Dan Inosanto. Dan shook his head slightly, as if to say, "Don't ask." Bruce Lee walked to the side of the room, picked up his towel, and wiped his hands. He glanced at the clock on the wall. "We'll start class in 10 minutes," he said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, as if nothing unusual had happened. The students began stretching again, quietly, stealing glances at each other but saying nothing. Dan Inosanto approached Bruce Lee and stood beside him for a moment. "She was good," Dan said. Bruce Lee nodded. "She was. You didn't hit her once." "Didn't need to." Dan paused, then asked, "What do you think she learned?" Bruce Lee folded the towel and set it on the bench. "That the fight was over before it started." He looked at Dan. "She came here to see if it could be done. Now she knows." Dan nodded slowly. Bruce Lee turned back toward the center of the room and took his place. "Okay," he said. "Let's work." And the class began. 3 months later, she returned. It was a Tuesday evening. The studio was full. 20 students working through drills, the sound of footwork and breathing filling the space. She stood in the doorway, the same canvas bag over her shoulder, and waited. One of the senior students recognized her and informed Bruce Lee. He walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. She bowed. He returned it. "I would like to train," she said. Bruce Lee nodded once. "Okay." She joined the class that night. She did not bring the shinai. She trained empty-handed, learning the principles of Jeet Kune Do, alongside students who had been there for months. She moved with discipline and attention, asking few questions, absorbing what was shown. She returned twice a week for the next year. Dan Inosanto later said that she never spoke about the demonstration, not to him, not to the other students, not, as far as anyone knew, to Bruce Lee. But she trained with the same focus she had brought to kendo. And over time, her movement began to change. Less reliance on structure, more sensitivity to distance and timing. When she eventually stopped attending, it was not abrupt. She simply had learned what she had come to learn. Years later, after Bruce Lee's death in 1973, the story began to circulate. It was told in dojos, in martial arts magazines, in conversations between practitioners who had heard it second-hand or third-hand. Most versions were exaggerated. Some claimed Bruce Lee had disarmed her in seconds. Others said she had been a Japanese national champion. A few said he had broken the shinai with his bare hands. None of that was true. Dan Inosanto corrected the story when he could. He told it the way he remembered it, calmly, factually, without embellishment. A ranked kendo practitioner had come to test a principle. Bruce Lee had demonstrated the principle. She had understood. And then she had trained. That was all. But the story persisted, not because it was dramatic, but because it illustrated something people were trying to understand about Bruce Lee's approach. It was not about proving superiority. It was not about defeating an opponent. It was about showing that a weapon, any weapon, was only as effective as the person's understanding of distance, timing, and structure, and that those principles did not belong to any one system. In the decades since, martial artists who study weapon retention, close-quarters combat, and traditional arts have referenced the kendo demonstration as a teaching example, not as a fight, as a lesson in adaptability. In 1998, a journalist interviewing Dan Inosanto asked him if the demonstration had been staged or exaggerated over time. Dan shook his head. "It happened exactly the way people say it did," he said. "Bruce didn't hit her, didn't need to. She came in with a weapon and left understanding that the weapon wasn't the issue. The issue was whether she could make it work against someone who understood space better than she did." The journalist asked if Bruce Lee had said anything about it afterward. Dan thought for a moment. "He said she had good form, clean technique, but that technique without adaptability is just repetition." "Did he think she learned that?" Dan nodded. "She came back, didn't she?" The story is still told. In dojos where weapons are trained alongside empty-hand methods. In seminars on Jeet Kune Do philosophy. In conversations about the limitations of traditional structure when facing unconventional approaches. It is not told as a victory. It is told as evidence that a person who understands distance does not need to block, that a person who understands timing does not need to clash, that the highest form of skill is not in overpowering the opponent's weapon, but in making the weapon irrelevant. The woman's name was never widely recorded. Her ranking was never verified by historians. The exact date in June 1971 was never confirmed. But the students who were there remember. And they remember it not because Bruce Lee won, but because he taught without speaking, without striking, just by being where he needed to be and never being where the weapon was. Subscribe to the channel to enjoy more interesting stories like the video, and don't forget to press the bell icon so you can receive updates about our upcoming new videos first. Thank you.